The piano is soft, almost apologetic, the same lonely theme that used to follow a green giant down midnight highways. Under the blistering heat of studio lights, a young bodybuilder with trembling hands and hearing aids fumbles with a zipper he cannot quite feel. Across the set, a man with tired, kind eyes is already watching. He doesn't yell. He walks closer. He smiles like a lighthouse. In 1978, the crew would say later, Bill Bixby didn't just act opposite the Hulk. He taught the Hulk how to feel. He showed Lou Ferrigno where to stand so the camera could hear him, even when the world sometimes couldn't. He protected the hearing aids from the makeup that stained everything it touched. He whispered direction in the dead hours of the night. How rage can be quiet, how sorrow can live in the shoulders, how a monster can break your heart without a single word. But the real secret wasn't in the coaching. It was in the eyes of Dr. David Banner. Eyes that seemed to carry a weight no stunt could rehearse. Long before America wept for the creature, Bill Bixby had already learned to grieve like a man out of time. Loss would come for him in ways no script could contain. Pain would arrive like a second skin. And still, he kept showing up. On set, in the director's chair, inside scenes that felt too honest for television. This is not a story about special effects. It's a story about a teacher in the shadows, a student learning to be seen, and a bond powerful enough to make audiences cry for a monster. Behind the rage, there was tenderness. Behind the legend, a cost. And behind the Incredible Hulk, a human heart that refused to stop beating.
Long before the spotlight and the green paint, Bill Bixby was just a quiet boy from San Francisco trying to survive the Great Depression. His father, Wilfred, made less than $20 a week as a store clerk. His mother, Jane, worked long hours at I. Magnin & Co., one of the city's grandest department stores. They lived paycheck to paycheck, moving into smaller rooms each year as the bills grew higher and the food ran thinner. When Bill was 8, his father joined the Navy and left for the South Pacific. That goodbye changed everything. The little boy who once had a family now had only silence and empty chairs. Jane held on, holding 2 jobs and pretending not to cry when she came home to a cold house. She encouraged Bill to sing in the Grace Cathedral Choir, a small job that gave him 50 cents a week and a sense of belonging. But one Sunday in 1947, something snapped. During a church service, 13-year-old Bill quietly raised a slingshot and shot a pebble at the bishop. It hit. The congregation gasped. He was expelled from the choir that day. The money stopped. His mother was humiliated. But for Bill, it was a moment of defiance, a vow that he would never bow to authority just to be accepted. That rebellion became his armor. Through high school, he played the class clown, the charmer, the boy who could hide pain behind a grin. He learned early that performance was a kind of survival. Every smile was a mask, every laugh a distraction from hunger. By 1952, the Korean War draft loomed. Rather than wait to be chosen, he enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve, a calculated act of courage. His unit had already lost nearly half its officers in World War II, yet Bixby didn't flinch. He wasn't looking for glory, he was looking for control. Managing personnel files at Naval Air Station Oakland, he found safety close to home and time to dream about a life beyond uniforms and rules. That boy who shot the bishop had turned into a man who refused to be silent. He would later walk into Hollywood with the same attitude, part rebel, part romantic, determined to prove that even the most broken beginnings could still lead to greatness. In the years to come, that defiant spark would carry him from hotel lobbies to sound stages and ultimately to a friendship that would redefine the meaning of strength.
After leaving UC Berkeley just a few credits shy of graduation, Bill Bixby carried nothing but a suitcase, a stubborn will, and $40 in his pocket. Los Angeles in the mid-1950s wasn't kind to dreamers. But Bixby had already survived worse. He found work at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, first as a desk clerk, then as a lifeguard at the pool where the ghosts of Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe still lingered in the air. 12-hour shifts became 14. He ate leftover room service trays, slept in a cramped, rented room, and paid for acting classes with whatever coins were left. Yet even in exhaustion, he studied every gesture of the stars who passed through the lobby, their posture, their timing, the way fame changed the way they breathed. He wasn't just watching actors, he was studying power. One afternoon, a group of Detroit ad men lounging by the pool noticed the tall, sharp-featured lifeguard with the classic grin. They offered him a modeling job, $200 a week, more than he'd ever imagined. For Bixby, it wasn't vanity. It was escape. He took his last $75, bought a one-way ticket to Detroit, and stepped onto a bus that smelled of diesel and possibility. The job led to a small theater role in The Boyfriend. The pay was miserable, $25 a week, barely enough for rent. But the applause was intoxicating. He'd lost 18 pounds eating beans and bread, yet for the first time, he felt full. I realized, he would later say, that I didn't want to be noticed. I wanted to be remembered. When the curtain fell, talent scouts came calling. He returned to Los Angeles with $200 in his pocket and a fire that wouldn't go out. He enrolled at the Estelle Harmon School of Acting, where an agent spotted him and signed him immediately. Within 2 years, he was standing under studio lights as a guest actor on The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1963, producer Jack Chertok looked up as Bixby entered the room and said, "No, you're not Bill Bixby, you're Tim O'Hara." That single line earned him the lead in My Favorite Martian, one of television's top shows. But the work was brutal. 5 days a week, 75 setups per day, no rehearsals, no rest. Still, he never complained. He'd fought for this. He'd built this life from hunger and silence, and he wasn't about to let fatigue take it away. By the time My Favorite Martian ended in 1966, Bill Bixby had become a household name. But behind the smile that America loved, he was already asking himself the question that would haunt the rest of his life. Will they ever see me as more than the man who smiled? That question, and the need to be seen for something deeper, would soon lead him to his greatest role and his greatest pain.
By the late 1960s, Bill Bixby had become one of television's most familiar faces. Handsome, dependable, the kind of leading man audiences trusted. But Hollywood's love can be cruel. Behind the applause, Bixby worried he was trapped inside a smile he no longer recognized. "America loves the nice guy," he once said, "but they never ask what happens to him when the lights go off." To escape that image, he began taking chances. Uncredited roles, supporting parts in movies that didn't need him but might teach him something. In Irma la Douce, 1963, he stood beside Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine, absorbing their rhythm like a silent student. Then came Clambake and Speedway with Elvis Presley. The sets were chaotic, pie fights, pranks, late nights, but Bixby never joined in the madness. He was there to learn. He watched how Presley handled fame and how that same fame hollowed him out. Elvis respected him for it, once borrowing Bixby's favorite spoken-word track, Softly as I Leave You, for his concerts years later. But Bixby's true metamorphosis began with The Courtship of Eddie's Father, 1969 to 1972. Playing a widowed dad raising his son, he revealed a warmth and vulnerability Hollywood rarely allowed its men. The chemistry between him and child actor Brandon Cruz melted the country's heart. Off-screen, it was real. Cruz came from a troubled home, and Bixby quietly became his mentor, his protector, his surrogate father. "He taught me what love was before I knew what acting was," Cruz later said. That tenderness came naturally to Bixby. What surprised everyone was his precision. He didn't just act, he directed. 8 episodes bore his name behind the camera. He moved like an orchestra conductor, guiding tone, light, and silence until everything breathed with feeling. In 1971, he earned an Emmy nomination and the respect of a new generation of filmmakers who saw in him something rare: discipline without ego. By 1977, Bixby was restless again. He wanted a challenge that would destroy the nice guy image once and for all. When Universal offered him The Incredible Hulk, most actors would have laughed. A comic book adaptation? A green monster? To Bixby, it was an opportunity to explore pain. He walked into the CBS meeting and said flatly, "This won't be a children's show. It's about loneliness, guilt, and the part of us that we can't control." The executives were unconvinced. They expected camp, a bright, silly spin like Batman in the 60s. But Bixby refused. He insisted on melancholy lighting, tragic piano music, and a human soul behind the transformation. When the pilot aired in November 1977, audiences were stunned. It wasn't superhero fiction. It was a Greek tragedy in green paint. Dr. David Banner wasn't fighting crime, he was fighting himself. Then came Lou Ferrigno, the 21-year-old deaf bodybuilder chosen to play the Hulk. Ferrigno had never acted, and his hearing loss made communication difficult on set. Many directors would have left him behind. Bixby did the opposite. He took Lou under his wing, teaching him to act without words. Late at night, between takes, Bixby demonstrated how emotion lived in posture, the way sorrow curved the shoulders, how anger breathed through the ribs. He shielded Lou's hearing aids from green makeup, wiped the sweat from his face, and told him, "You don't need to speak. The world will feel you." That bond transformed the series. On screen, Banner and the Hulk seemed like two halves of one soul, one man torn between intellect and instinct. Off-screen, it was the same. Bixby, the teacher of control; Lou, the student of release. Together, they created something unprecedented. A monster you could pity, a scientist you could fear, and a friendship that turned silence into art. The work was brutal. 14-hour days, suffocating makeup, night shoots in freezing weather. But the emotional depth that Bixby demanded paid off. The Incredible Hulk became one of television's highest-rated dramas, earning critical praise for its realism and heartache. Viewers didn't just watch the Hulk, they felt him. Children saw strength in the creature. Adults saw themselves in Banner's eyes. For Lou Ferrigno, those eyes were unforgettable. "Bill was like a father to me," he said decades later. "He taught me how to feel, not just how to act." Even when Bixby wasn't on camera, he'd stand behind the monitor, silently mirroring Lou's movements so the young actor could sense the rhythm of emotion. It was a master teaching a student how to speak through body and breath. The synergy between them was so strong that the show transcended its genre. The Incredible Hulk wasn't about transformation, it was transformation. It turned pulp fiction into poetry. And at its center stood Bill Bixby, a man who had spent his whole life learning how to hide pain, and who finally turned that pain into performance.
By the early 1980s, Bixby was not just an actor, but a legend of American television. But for all his control on set, life beyond it was slipping away. He had turned grief into greatness, silence into cinema, but fate was about to remind him that no one, not even the strongest among us, can outrun the things that live inside. When The Incredible Hulk reached its height in the early 1980s, Bill Bixby was more than a television star. He was a craftsman, a perfectionist, a man admired for his grace under pressure. But behind that calm smile, the world was quietly falling apart. In March 1981, while on a ski trip at Mammoth Lakes, Bixby's 6-year-old son, Christopher, developed a sudden throat infection. At the hospital, a doctor delayed treatment to remove a splinter from another patient's finger. By the time they returned to Christopher, he was gone. Bixby stood frozen beside the hospital bed, a father stripped of everything but disbelief. Later he said, "My son suffocated while the doctor was removing a splinter. There's no script for that." Hollywood didn't see that moment. What it saw was a man who came back to work within weeks, calm, polite, focused. But something in him had fractured. Friends said he carried a silence that couldn't be broken even by applause. On set, he gave directions softly, methodically, as if trying to regain control over a life that had slipped from his hands. Just over a year later, on April 7, 1982, tragedy struck again. Brenda Benet, his ex-wife and Christopher's mother, lit candles, laid down in the bathroom, and ended her life with a .38 revolver. She was 36. Neighbors said the grief had never left her. She simply decided she couldn't live with it anymore. For Bixby, it was another loss he couldn't save anyone from. Not his son, not his wife, not himself. In public, he smiled for interviews, spoke about the craft, the discipline, the art. But privately, he drowned in guilt. When you lose a child, he told a close friend, you stop fearing anything else. Nothing can hurt you the same way again. That fearlessness became both his armor and his curse. It made him fearless on set, willing to shoot in freezing nights, to direct scenes others called impossible. Yet it also numbed him. Pain became a language he understood too well, and it began to shape everything he created. You can feel that pain in The Incredible Hulk. Watch his eyes when Dr. David Banner begs the creature inside him to stop. That isn't acting. That's a father pleading with fate. In every scene where Banner loses control, Bixby was reliving the one night he couldn't change the ending. When the crew later recalled those days, they spoke of exhaustion. 14-hour shoots, green paint that clung to everything, crew members quitting from fatigue. Yet through it all, Bixby never raised his voice, never once. When Lou Ferrigno's breakfast was stolen by a wild coyote at 4 a.m., Bixby didn't curse or shout. He simply adjusted the schedule, made a joke, and kept the crew calm. It wasn't just professionalism. It was a man holding the chaos of others together because he couldn't hold his own. As the 1980s moved on, Bixby threw himself into directing. It became his therapy, his sanctuary. Every frame was an attempt to make sense of loss, to capture emotion where words failed him. He directed Mr. Merlin, Sledgehammer, Dreams, even comedies that tried to make him laugh again. But the shadows never left. When The Death of the Incredible Hulk aired in 1990, Bixby had turned his grief into art so powerful it felt prophetic. In the film's final scene, Banner dies in a plane crash, arms reaching toward the sky, finally at peace. Viewers cried. Bixby's eyes in that scene said everything. Exhaustion, acceptance, surrender. What no one knew was that he was already fighting cancer.
Pain had become the air he breathed. And yet through it all, he kept creating, kept teaching, kept showing up. Brandon Cruz, the boy he once called his son, later said, "He carried everyone else's pain because it made his lighter." Bill Bixby had learned to live with grief by turning it into performance. He had taught the Hulk how to feel, but in doing so, he had taught the world how to mourn.
By the early 1990s, Bill Bixby's body was losing the war, his spirit refused to surrender. In April 1991, doctors told him the words no one is ready to hear: prostate cancer. Advanced. The disease had already begun to spread, but Bixby didn't stop working. He never did. "If I stop," he told a friend, "it will win." He directed through pain that would have broken lesser men. Every morning he swallowed a handful of pills, smiled at the crew, and stepped onto set like it was a stage built to defy death. The NBC sitcom Blossom became his final battlefield, a series about youth and family where laughter masked lessons about growing up. While others saw it as light-hearted television, for Bixby, it was a chance to teach life one last time. Even as the cancer reached his bones and liver, he refused to let anyone see weakness. Crew members said he still leaned in to adjust lights, corrected camera angles, and encouraged young actors with the same warmth he once gave Lou Ferrigno and Brandon Cruz. "He never let pain show," one cameraman said. "You'd never know he was dying." In February 1990, he had already given audiences his final farewell as Dr. David Banner in The Death of the Incredible Hulk. He not only acted, but directed the film himself, a haunting story of a man who sought peace and finally found it through death. In the climactic scene, Banner, mortally wounded, crashes through a plane window, the Hulk's fury giving way to human stillness. As he lies dying, the camera lingers on his face, half in shadow, half in light, the same duality that had defined Bixby's life. When the credits rolled, millions of viewers wept, unaware that the fiction mirrored reality too closely. Behind the scenes, there was already a script for the sequel, The Revenge of the Incredible Hulk, in which Banner would rise again, mind intact, body reborn. But that script was never filmed. The monster that Bixby had spent his life teaching to feel was now beyond saving. By 1992, the treatments had stopped working. He checked into UCLA Medical Center for experimental drugs, enduring endless IV lines and radiation sessions. Yet, even then, he kept working. On November 20th, 1992, he directed an episode titled Getting Lucky. The very next day, he was hospitalized, his final call sheet still tucked in his jacket pocket. A year later, on November 21st, 1993, Bill Bixby died at home in Century City. He was 59. Friends said he left quietly, without fear, the same way he had lived after losing everything, with grace. The man who once made America cry for a monster had become a symbol of what it means to fight with dignity. His body was gone, but his work, his empathy, his artistry, his relentless kindness stayed behind like footprints in wet concrete. Bill Bixby's final transformation wasn't into the Hulk. It was into peace. On November 29, 1993, a week after Bill Bixby's death, the chapel at Forest Lawn overflowed with people. There were no red carpets, no flashing cameras, just quiet tears and trembling hands clutching roses. Actors, crew members, studio executives, even old lighting technicians came to say goodbye to the man who had once held every set together with nothing but calm and kindness. Lou Ferrigno stood near the front, silent, eyes red. He had called Bixby his mentor, his brother, his father. When people asked what he learned from him, Lou said, "Bill taught me that strength isn't about muscles, it's about grace."
Nearby, Brandon Cruz, Eddie, the boy from the courtship of Eddie's father, placed an old photograph on the casket. The two of them laughing between takes, a frozen moment of joy. "He showed me what love was," Cruz whispered, "before I even knew what acting was." Hollywood remembered Bixby as the man who never yelled, never gave up, and never stopped showing up. When younger actors doubted themselves, he took them aside and reminded them that art was about empathy, not ego. When directors lost control, he quietly fixed it without taking credit. Even at his weakest, he lifted others. After his passing, reruns of The Incredible Hulk began airing late at night again. Viewers said the show felt different now, darker, heavier, more human. The final shot of Dr. David Banner dying beneath the sunset no longer belonged to fiction. It was Bill Bixby himself saying goodbye in the only language he knew, through performance. He didn't leave behind wealth or scandal. He left behind something far rarer: reverence. In every quiet mentor, every actor who treats the crew with dignity, every scene where pain is played with honesty, there's a trace of him. Because Bill Bixby didn't just teach the Hulk to be human, he reminded Hollywood what humanity looked like. If you ever watched The Incredible Hulk and felt a strange sadness behind those green eyes, that wasn't special effects. That was Bill Bixby. A man who turned pain into poetry, who carried loss with quiet dignity, who taught the world that real strength doesn't come from power, it comes from compassion. Hollywood loves its legends, but few ever live like one. Bixby did. He smiled through grief, lifted others while he was falling, and kept the light burning long after the applause had faded. So the next time you hear that lonely piano theme drifting through the night, remember, behind the rage, behind the monster, there was a man. If you ever watched The Incredible Hulk and felt a strange sadness behind those green eyes, that wasn't special effects. That was Bill Bixby, a man who turned pain into poetry, who carried loss with quiet dignity, who taught the world that real strength doesn't come from power, it comes from compassion. Hollywood loves its legends, but few ever live like one. Bixby did. He smiled through grief, lifted others while he was falling, and kept the light burning long after the applause had faded. So the next time you hear that lonely piano theme drifting through the night, remember, behind the rage, behind the monster, there was a man. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe, because fame fades, but humanity endures. This was Bill Bixby, the man who made the Hulk human.